So, Steve, we heard sort of that same sentiment echoed from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, at a hearing on Capitol Hill yesterday. What is the reality about what this administration inherited?
So, one of the things that's interesting about the president is that no matter how many times he gets corrected, he still goes back and says the same stuff over and over again. As he kind of implied in that clip, he used to say it was the worst inflation in history. People kept correcting him, and so he now talks about 48 years. But in fact, look what happened. He didn't inherit the worst inflation in history or any inflation above normal to speak of. We did have a significant amount of inflation, of course, during COVID, up to 9%. We worked our way down. This is the Biden administration. It worked its way down, 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 down. It got down to right around 3% when President Trump took office, and now it's at about 2.7%. So he inherited a very stable rate of inflation, and it only got marginally better. But we're talking about tariffs, so let's just take a look at the facts on tariffs. Look, we all know that the tariffs didn't have quite as bad of an economic effect or inflationary effect as we thought they were. A lot of it got absorbed along the way, but that didn't mean it had no effect. So this tracks imported and domestic goods sold at 5 big retailers in the U.S., and you can see that going back to October of 24, the trend line of both domestic and imported goods was down. In other words, they were in fact even going down in price because trade is a good thing. It brings in goods at lower prices for consumers, and then domestic producers have to match that. So that's where it was going. Then you hit Liberation Day, and look what happens. It turns around, and the prices of both go up. And again, even though domestic goods, you'd say, well, why should they go up? It's because when imported goods go up in price, the domestic retailers and producers are able to raise their prices. And so, in fact, the tariffs have been a contributor of probably 1 or 2 percentage points. And Powell said this himself, actually, in testimony very recently, have been going up in price. And so part of why inflation hasn't gotten down to 2% as the Fed wants and as has been promised is because of the tariffs, as a matter of fact.
Were you surprised, Steve, to hear Secretary Bessent yesterday claim that tariffs are not inflationary, despite being presented with a letter in which he wrote tariffs will be inflationary?
This is an administration in which you can only survive if you completely parrot and echo what the president says, no matter what you think, and give him all the credit for whatever it is we're trying to give him credit for. So I was surprised, and I wasn't. Scott Bessent, when he was on Wall Street, was certainly thought of as a fairly typical or conventional Wall Street thinker, which is generally anti-tariff. And I wasn't totally surprised for the reason I said, because everybody parrots the president.
So let's go back to as we go to your next chart, Steve, what Mike Pence said, and that's the promise that